By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land. But when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had received the spies in peace. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release or in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and in holes in the ground. Yet all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus Christ as the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The last time I stood in this pulpit to preach was 49 days ago, June 30th, when I stood before you as the nominee for the position of associate pastor. It was a blessing that so many of you could be there in that season of vacations and lazy weekend mornings, and what I understand was a almost weekly pattern of severe thunderstorms. I am much less nervous today than I was on that day. There is no vote happening after this session, after all. I've been promised there are no more votes. But I was eager to share with you that day what I understood the purpose of the church to be and why I was, and still am, excited to live that out with you together. It's no secret that the Christian church in America is undergoing transition. And I believe it is necessary and faithful to take a step back and consider how we go about being church together and why we go about being church together. It's important that we take time to remember those things, to remind ourselves of it. And wouldn't you know it, the lectionary reading for this Sunday includes one of the most well-known passages about faith community. And so I hope you will find meaning one more time diving into this question, clouds of witnesses and all. This passage that we read from Hebrews is designed to catch our attention. The author covers an awful lot of ground in a very short period of time, don't you think? They list dozens of biblical characters going almost book to book throughout the entire Old Testament, describing how these servants of God suffered yet were obedient, how through faith they lived up to the standard that Jesus offered even before Jesus arrived. There's that big therefore right at the beginning of chapter 12, and that is meant to encompass a whole list of folks who we didn't even read about this morning, covering all of chapters 10 and 11. Therefore, since all these things about our ancestors in faith are true, since they are watching us live today, let us follow Jesus together and do so boldly. Did you notice the way it was written was plural? It's not addressed to you or to me, singular. It's us. It's written that way in the Greek. It's very clear this is meant to be a group. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. In summarizing the entirety of the history of Yahweh's people, the author of Hebrews insists we respond courageously and that we respond together. I think Southern Heights in Lincoln, Nebraska could fairly be labeled the quintessential Presbyterian church. They have a very nice, clean building on a hill on the outskirts of the city of Lincoln. Appropriately, there's a subdivision on one side and then cornfields off in the distance. That's how they do it in Nebraska. They have about 150 members. They have a full-time pastor and a couple support staff. They've had a long history of mission engagement, a faithful choir, as I remember it. I heard their pastor talking at a conference a few years ago, and she described how Southern Heights has had in its office since the 1980s a master plan for expanding the church that included building a new Christian education building and a new parking lot onto some extra land that the church has. And a few years ago, some brave souls started saying out loud what lots of folks had maybe been thinking for a little while. I'm not sure our congregation's going to be doubling or tripling in membership anytime soon. Maybe there's something else we could do with this plot of land that we have. Their mission work for some time had been focused on hunger ministry. They had been involved with food pantries and lots of missions for food insecurity, so they discerned a creative path forward. They fundraised, and on a full 2 acres of their land, they filled it with community garden plots and urban agricultural plots for harvesting, an outdoor education classroom, and a food forest or a food garden, which includes dozens and dozens of trees and shrubs and other plants that bear fruits and vegetables throughout all times of the year. They invite neighbors from time to time to come and pick some of this food, but mostly they harvest it regularly to provide to these food pantries that are nearby, recognizing that vegetables and fruits are the hardest commodity to come by for most food pantries. This new ministry became a defining part of their church, and sure enough, they discovered there were some green thumbs, some eco-friendly neighbors who found this out about them and became members of their congregation as well. They did that ministry creatively, and the city of Lincoln, I think, is better for it. Now, each church does ministry a little bit differently, of course. But thinking about how they energized their congregation and found something of a purpose, it reminded me of a conversation I had a few years back with Rachel. Rachel grew up at a church I had served previously. She was no longer active. The occasion for me running into her was a Sunday morning when one of her parents was being installed as a deacon. I got to know her a little bit, was asking what was going on in her life, and she made a point of saying that she was not someone who attended church anymore. She said, "The church, I think, is pretty much a nice person's club." You come on Sunday mornings to be reminded how to be nice people. You do nice people things together. You go and do community service projects. You have nice people. You have fellowship time with one another. You stand beside one another in times of grief. It's all very nice people things to do. You bring your kids to teach them to be nice people as well. She said, it's not that I think that that's so much of a bad thing, but I think I can be a pretty decent person without all the ritual and commitment. That's why I don't come. We might be tempted to hear these words as naive, but I promise you, hers is an opinion that is shared by an increasingly large percentage of Americans in every generation, but especially younger ones. And if I'm being completely honest, I can see at times where she's kind of coming from. But in the case of Southern Heights, the words that Rachel shared made me wonder what the difference is, in their case, between being a dynamic food ministry and simply hosting a large civic community garden. What actually makes church? How are we more than a nice person's club? Today's reading from Luke helps provide an answer, I believe. In Luke 12, we encounter Jesus in a way that we do not often encounter Jesus. It's unexpected, I think. We're not super familiar with this side of him. We're more used to Jesus, who offers wise parables of teachings or comforting words to those on society's margins. But here, Jesus says without hesitation and very explicitly that he comes not to bring peace, but to bring division. Fathers and sons, daughters and mothers at each other's necks. Households will be divided. It's worth wondering what he means by that. If I understand the text, I think Jesus is stating the realistic implications of what his teachings will mean if we put them into practice. Because on the one hand, a life of Christian living will bring us peaceful community and will help heal divisions where there once was division. But on the other hand, things look a little bit differently if we start to, for instance, live out the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount. If we start taking seriously that the meek will actually inherit the earth, that those who hunger will be filled, that the poor would be lifted up, that those in power would be held to account for those they abuse, that making peace and not war is the desire of God. If we actually believe these things and try to live them out, we're going to ruffle some feathers. It won't always be clean and tidy. But it will matter. By God will it matter. As I come to the end of my second week as your associate pastor, I am energized for the coming seasons of ministry with you, not only because of what I see over on the horizon, but because of the examples of what this congregation has done before. I'm confident this ministry has been and will continue to be important and impactful. This is, after all, the congregation that looked around this community in Richardson and in 1985 joined with other congregations and organizations to launch the network of community ministries to provide food and clothing and other services to those in need in Richardson. I had the opportunity to visit Network last week. Thank you, Betty. And my eyes confirmed what the army of volunteers and board members from this congregation, I am sure, have long known, that Network changes lives. This congregation has made an impact through it. This is also the same congregation who 15 years ago discerned a need for back-to-school immunizations and other things like backpacks and, more broadly, access to essential health care for children and senior citizens. And what started as a modest effort has this year, just last Sunday, become an enterprise to serve 1,800 people in this community. I would say that's an impactful way this congregation serves. And this is the congregation that voted to print its name in the most prominent newspaper in the country and invite a leader in gun violence prevention to host a class on this issue that is certainly divisive at times, but a conversation which our nation is deeply in need of. I'm confident that in these and in so many other ways, St. Barnabas is living out its call towards bold and courageous witness that we have read in Luke, and living into that promise of community found in Hebrews. In short, I believe we succeed at being more than a club when Christ is the one who inspires us, and when love is our ethic, no matter the cost. We are more than a club when we observe the world as it is now and have strength to imagine what God's future has in store and work to bring that about. We are more than a club when we do these things together in community. The church might be changing. Society might be changing. But what remains the same is that we live in a world desperately in need of good news. May our ministry together bear witness to that good news in this season and in every season to come. Amen.